Hi, Tall Toast here. Today I'll be recapping the action thriller Shooter. Settle in, and subtitles on. Deep in the Ethiopian desert, Sergeant Lee Swagger and Corporal Donnie Fenn are on a mission for peace. After successfully taking care of the targeted enemy vehicle, they prepare to leave, but are suddenly ambushed by a massive army that wasn't supposed to be there. As the two sides engage in battle, Swagger uses his exceptional sniper skills to take down as many foes as possible. With bombs detonating all around them, they call for extraction, but their CIA support team shockingly ignores them, leading to Donnie's tragic death when they're attacked by a helicopter. Enraged, Swagger returns fire, and after a few missed shots, he hits the helicopter's propellers, causing it to crash. 3 years on, Swagger has retreated to the mountains of Wyoming, living a secluded life with his faithful dog. One day, Colonel Isaac Johnson pays him a visit, offering him a mission to devise a plan for the assassination of the president. Swagger is not asked to carry out the assassination, just to plan it, as they've received intelligence that an attempt will soon be made, and they need an expert to determine the details so they can prevent it. Initially, Swagger declines the offer, but before leaving, Johnson provides him with the information and appeals to his sense of duty. After testing the distance he could shoot from with his rifle and contemplating the situation, Swagger decides to help. Swagger visits each of the 3 locations where the president will give a speech, analyzing every detail until he concludes that the attempt will take place in Philadelphia. Upon informing Johnson of his findings, Johnson congratulates Swagger for a job well done and convinces him to join them on the day of the event as a spotter. Swagger also encounters Michael Sandor, another veteran soldier who is assisting with the operation. On the day of the big event, Swagger joins Johnson's team in a room overlooking the venue, which they have set up with the help of a local cop. As the president is about to give his speech, Swagger alerts them that this is the ideal moment for the shooting. Instead, the cop opens fire on Swagger as the unknown enemy targets the president. While Johnson's team cleans the room and only leaves Swagger's rifle behind, Swagger runs through the streets and comes across FBI agent Nick Memphis. Since Nick is a rookie, it's easy for Swagger to disarm him and handcuff him to a railing. Then he steals his car keys as he tells him he didn't do it, and it was all a setup. The city is quickly taken over by the police and the FBI, who even send helicopters to chase after Swagger. To lose them for a while, Swagger enters a car wash, and while the car is cleaned, he cuts open the back seat to reach into the trunk and get a first aid kit that he uses to provisionally deal with his wounds. Swagger, after the chase, finds himself surrounded by the police. With no other option, he reverses the car and tosses it into the river. The FBI soon discovers the car, but it's empty, as Swagger has managed to slip away by hitchhiking on a barge. Swagger lands on the other side of the river and steals a truck that allows him to smoothly pass by security. In the meantime, Swagger's photo is splashed all over the news. As the news of Nick's failure spreads, his boss informs him that he'll be subjected to a review for having brought embarrassment to the FBI. Nick recalls Swagger's claims that it was all a setup, but his boss doesn't buy it and cautions him against including it in his report. In the dark of night, Swagger sneaks into a grocery store with the lights turned off to avoid recognition. He procures essential items and breaks into a mechanic shop to grab additional tools and use their restroom. In the bathroom, Swagger uses the supplies to create a makeshift IV and inject it into his arm. Meanwhile, Nick is on phone duty and receives a call from the grocery store clerk, who thinks the man she saw could be Swagger. Nick is convinced and recognizes the items bought as a makeshift wound treatment, but his boss dismisses his findings. Undeterred, Nick delves into the incident details and senses something is off. Swagger arrives at Sarah's doorstep in Kentucky after a long drive, seeking refuge. Sarah, Donnie's widow, recognizes him from the news, but is hesitant to let him in. Swagger convinces her of his innocence by expressing his willingness to be shot rather than return to the authorities. Sarah then updates him on the latest news of the failed assassination attempt, revealing the Ethiopian archbishop was shot instead of the president. To treat his wounds, Swagger gives Sarah a list of supplies, including nitrous oxide gas in whipped cream cans, which he inhales to fall unconscious as Sarah stitches him up. Meanwhile, Nick has been working all night, piecing together the details of the event, and becomes increasingly convinced of a larger conspiracy. He confides in his co-worker, Alords, who reveals that the cop who shot Swagger has been found dead. This only strengthens Nick's belief, and he continues his investigation. In the meantime, Nick visits all the buildings surrounding the area of the incident and finds tripod marks on the floor of an old bell tower. Then he goes to a cyber cafe to chat with some weapons experts that quickly tell him about the remote-controlled rifles that could have been used in such a situation. When Swagger wakes up, Sarah tells him his dog has been shot because they thought he wasn't going back. Swagger's determined to clear his name, and he thinks Nick is the only way to do that, so he makes a plan to meet him. Sarah accepts to help him and even gives him Donnie's old hunting rifle. The plan is simple. Sarah slips into a new disguise and heads over to a cafe to meet Nick. She hands him Swagger's car's identification details, confident that it will catch Johnson's eye when Nick enters it into the system. Her plan works flawlessly. Swagger, who's been keeping a close watch, is confronted by law enforcement asking for identification. Being a seasoned soldier, taking down the police and even using their dog as an advantage is child's play for him. He easily overpowers them, snatches a radio, and makes a break for it. Meanwhile, Nick does exactly as Swagger predicted and searches for the car information in the system, but it's under a level of clearance he doesn't have access to. He asks Alords for help, and after some hesitation, she tells him which case has such clearance and confirms that the newscasts got tapes of the incident that were heavily edited. Swagger's prediction also comes true. All of Nick's snooping around is noticed by Johnson's men, and they'll take care of it. Nick is kidnapped and beaten up for information, but since he won't talk, the thugs put up a contraption to shoot him and make it look like Nick did it to himself. Fortunately, Nick is saved at the last minute by Swagger, who kills all the thugs with his rifle from afar before coming inside. Nick offers his help to do this the legal way, since he can prove Swagger didn't shoot the Archbishop. But Swagger only wants revenge, and the law can't give him that. It may clear his name, but the corrupted names will still be in power and do the same thing again in a couple of years. Since Nick has already done enough to lose his own job, he accepts to help. While Johnson's men find out Swagger has sent flowers to Sarah every year and send someone to kidnap her so they can use her as bait, Swagger and Nick drive to Tennessee to meet Mr. Raitt, a firearms expert. Mr. Raitt tells them about a technique called paper patching, which makes it possible for a bullet to be fired from one rifle but made to look like it came from another. This is how Johnson framed Swagger. They used a round Swagger fired when he did the test before accepting the mission. Mr. Raitt also tells him that the only sniper left alive besides Swagger that could have pulled such a trick is Mikhail Skrzerbiak, whose description quickly makes Swagger realize it's Sandor's real name. At night, Nick reaches out to Alords for intel on Sandor's whereabouts. Unbeknownst to them, this was a trap set by Johnson and Senator Charles Meacham to lure Swagger into a deadly situation. Meanwhile, Johnson's men storm into Sarah's home, with one of the men being taken down by Sarah, but the other capturing her. Swagger and Nick venture to a hardware store to prepare for the potential danger ahead by purchasing supplies to create bombs. Swagger trains Nick in basic sniper skills, preparing him to be his spotter. The duo then sets out to Virginia, where Sandor is hiding. When it's time to act, Nick stays camouflaged in the bushes while giving Swagger the locations of the guards through a communicator. Swagger takes out most of the men and spreads the bombs they made around the area before entering the house. Sandor explains that he was used by Johnson in the same way Swagger was, and that the whole mission has always been planned to kill the Archbishop. The shot was meant to appear as if it was intended for the president, but the Archbishop was about to reveal an entire village that was wiped out for an oil pipeline run by Meacham and Johnson. This happened in Ethiopia 3 years ago, and that's how Swagger learns that he unwittingly provided overwatch for that massacre that day, which is why he and Donnie were left to die. As Nick tells Swagger that soldiers have arrived and are surrounding the house, Sandor confesses, "I've been talking only to keep Swagger inside while backup arrived." He then reminds Swagger, "This conspiracy runs deep, and there isn't just one head to cut." Sandor informs Swagger of Johnson having Sarah before he puts a gun under his chin to end things on his own terms. The soldiers then begin breaking into the house. Swagger fights them off as Nick activates the pipe bombs and the gas. With the smoke as cover, Swagger leaves the house and continues to shoot more soldiers as he runs into a safe spot. Then Nick activates the napalm before sniping any remaining soldiers so Swagger can escape safely. A helicopter soon arrives at the area, but after what happened in Ethiopia, This time Swagger is ready for it. He and Nick run away so the helicopter can chase them, and once it flies over the right spot, Swagger detonates a bomb that lights the helicopter on fire and makes it crash. The pair manages to escape to Montana, where Nick calls a Lourdes and gets her to put him on the line with his boss. Nick only tells them he's with Swagger and that he can't trust them before hanging up, because this whole chat is a setup for Johnson to track the phone and call them. Swagger offers him a deal. He'll get Sarah back, and in exchange, he'll give them Sandor's confession about what happened in Ethiopia, which he secretly recorded. He also demands the exchange to be done with Meacham for extra privacy. They agree to meet on a snowy mountain. Johnson, Meacham, Sarah, and her captor get there first. A man suddenly appears a few steps away and begins approaching them. Johnson's hidden snipers shoot him and he falls, but this is all a trick. That man is Nick, and he's wearing a piece of metal under his jacket, so he's fine. Nick acted as bait, so Swagger could find Johnson's snipers and kill them. This is quickly followed by shooting the thug that is keeping Sarah. While the FBI receives a letter from Nick telling them about this encounter, Swagger approaches the group to do the exchange. But first, Nick makes everyone drop their weapons. Sarah takes one of those guns to shoot the thug for what he did to her. Swagger comforts her before finally talking to Meacham. It's all rather pointless, though. After offering Swagger a job, Meacham reminds him how deep the corruption runs in the system. Realizing how useless his recording is, Swagger decides to burn it right before the FBI arrives to arrest him. A few days later, in Washington, D.C., Swagger is allowed to have a private meeting with the Attorney General and other FBI leaders. Nick, Sarah, and Johnson are there too. Swagger had requested for the rifle of his that had been found at the scene of the crime to be brought, and now he uses it to prove his innocence. Since Swagger swaps all of the firing pins out of his guns whenever he leaves home, this rifle is unable to shoot correctly, and Swagger demonstrates so by failing to fire at Nick. The Attorney General accepts this evidence and grants Swagger his freedom, but he can't accept his accusations against Johnson and Meacham because he lacks proof. Nick cuts in and shows him pictures of the massacre in Ethiopia, but the Attorney General claims he can't do anything about it because it's out of his jurisdiction. Sometime later, Meacham, Johnson, and their assistant are at the senator's mountain cabin. Suddenly, Johnson falls dead from a shot, and their car outside explodes. It's Swagger, who is now at the door shooting the security guard and then the assistant before going after Meacham. When the senator reminds him he's part of the USA government, Swagger just replies "exactly" and kills him as well. Afterward, Swagger puts his gun in Johnson's hand and breaks the gas pipe, so once he leaves the house, the building explodes too. Swagger eventually reaches the road where Sarah is waiting for him in a car. They drive away to start a new life together.